Thank you for joining us from the ENE News newsroom in Washington, D.C. I'm Monica Trauzzi. This week, the Trump administration rolled out its highly anticipated executive action on climate and energy. This action largely seeks to roll back the Obama administration's climate legacy. And with me to unpack it all and talk about what's coming next are ENE News reporters Emily Holden, Evan Lehmann, Hannah Hess, and Ellen Gilmer. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Busy news week, yep? Mm-hmm. So let's talk a bit about, you've all reported on different aspects of the story, from political to legal to regulatory. What are your key takeaways from your reporting this week, Emily?
Well, I thought the most important thing to keep in mind while President Trump got on stage at EPA and surrounded himself with coal miners and said, this is what we're going to do to bring back the coal industry, is that is still incredibly difficult. And some of the analysis has shown that even without the Clean Power Plan, you could see just a really moderate rebound of coal mining in the West, but you're not going to be bringing back jobs in Appalachia in the way that he's tried to promise.
So that's reality. In politics, I think it was a big win. He was able to reorient his narrative after the devastating loss of healthcare last year, or last week rather, and talk about something that, he has really accelerated on, throughout the campaign and so forth, and surrounded himself with coal miners and said, you are going to be coming back to work. Now, the countdown begins, right, and on that promise now. And, we'll see if he can actually put 35,000 miners back to work that have lost their jobs over the past 6 years or so.
I think Tuesday was like the release of a pressure valve almost for the energy and environment community. We've been waiting for this order for weeks. And now that it's finally here, it landed, and Republicans on Capitol Hill were able to sound aligned and together and very supportive of the president. And so it's been interesting this week to watch, the discussion about what comes next.
I think one important takeaway is just that, as crazy as this week was, most of the impacts haven't even yet begun. And the order, while it did some things that take place immediately, like revoke guidances, largely it directs agencies to do things. So we're still going to be seeing that process play out, and we're going to be seeing all of the fallout on all sides there.
And what are the potential avenues for litigation stemming from the executive order?
So in the immediate term, we're not going to see a lot of people challenging the order itself. The closest we have are environmental groups in a tribe who have challenged the lifting of the coal leasing moratorium, which is interesting. In that case, they're challenging in the lawsuit not the executive order itself, but the Interior Department's action complying with the executive order. Other than that, we won't see a lot of direct executive order lawsuits. We'll see lawsuits that are related to whatever the agencies ultimately decide on regulatory rollbacks and things like that. And we'll see a lot of scrambling in the existing litigation in the Clean Power Plan, for example, hydraulic fracturing rule, methane.
Hannah, what's it been like on the Hill this week? What's the reaction?
For the most part, pretty predictable. Republicans, especially those from western states and coal regions, were very excited for this. A couple of them joined Trump at EPA for the signing, and then Democrats immediately came out with legislation in both chambers that would repeal this executive order, rescind.
Is there an opening here for Congress to act? I mean, we always hear that climate change should be handled through legislative action. We've heard talk about a carbon tax. Is there an opening here, or are they just letting the executive branch handle it?
Well, interestingly enough, there were some small cracks in the GOP response. A couple of the more moderate Republicans who are acknowledging that climate science is real and that climate change is a threat were critical of the order, and critical specifically of the effects that it would have on greenhouse gas emissions. Chris Van Hollen in the Senate announced that he was working on some carbon pricing legislation. And then also Jerry McNerney, a California Democrat, said he's working on bringing back some carbon pricing legislation. And when I spoke to him this week, he said last Congress it was really more about messaging, and this time he's really trying to refine the legislation so that it's more politically feasible, and he's really hoping for some bipartisan support. We'll see if that happens.
Emily, are they going to propose a replacement for the Clean Power Plan?
So there was some talk early on while we were waiting for this order to come out that the smart legal move would be to replace the Clean Power Plan with something a lot weaker, because then essentially you wouldn't have to fight over whether EPA was required to issue something. I think based on Evan's reporting out of the White House, it seems like the message to EPA is just get rid of the rule. And that'll take a really long time. So it's possible that we won't know for a while. It's also possible that it'll just drag out so long that it won't necessarily matter whether there's a replacement or it's being rescinded, because the rulemaking process could just take so long it could stretch through this entire administration.
Evan, politically, I mean, how are climate and energy issues playing for the president overall?
Well, I mean, I think he's making it work for him right now. He was elected, in states that tend to have energy, tend to have manufacturing jobs, tend to be concerned about electricity prices. So, his narrative now is in line with all of those things, and he's satisfying those promises that he made. But again, I think he's going to have to do more than just say it. He's going to have to show it too, and that's going to come over the next several years. And if the economic sort of atmosphere in West Virginia and elsewhere doesn't change, well, then he could just become another politician in D.C.
Emily, the order rolls back the use of the social cost of carbon consideration in rulemaking. How significant is that? And if we don't see many regulations coming out of this EPA, is it really a big hit?
Right, well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think, so the social cost of carbon essentially is putting a dollar value on carbon emissions, and so it's kind of your first test to say, is this something that is enough of a benefit to society that we should regulate it? And I don't think that you're going to be seeing a lot of regulations coming out of the Trump administration, so I don't know if that's something they would even need to consider, right? Because they aren't going to make that first move to regulate it, like any sector.
So what's next for the coal industry? I mean, we have some pretty significant market dynamics at play. Obviously, natural gas and renewables are doing quite well in the market. How much of a boost does this move actually give coal?
Emily might be better suited to answer this, but I don't think it does anything, right? The Clean Power Plan wasn't actually in place. It stayed by the Supreme Court. There weren't actually regulations affecting utilities on the ground. So, but that said, utilities don't sort of operate in this sort of immediate win atmosphere that politics does. And these utilities are planning far out into the future, and I'm pretty sure Emily's going to be reporting out next week around something like utilities still are planning for carbon legislation or carbon regulation going forward.
Right, that's something they always did even before the Clean Power Plan had a name, right? They knew that there was some sort of restriction on carbon coming, and so they made decisions based on that, or they at least kept the options open so that as they move forward, they would be in a good position. And some utilities have done that better than others, and that depends on where they are in the country and what they started out with and prices and that sort of thing. But I think ultimately the only thing that could really help coal at this point is if we saw some very unexpected huge increase in natural gas prices.
So Ellen, Keystone XL is very much back in the news. It's the story that keeps on giving. So the president has moved to approve the pipeline, but now, of course, we're seeing some legal action already. Walk us through what we've seen this week.
So far, we have 2 lawsuits from environmental groups and tribal groups who are challenging. The Trump administration, in approving the pipeline, relied on an environmental impact statement that was conducted during the Obama administration. It was completed in early 2014. So the groups are saying that it was flawed in the first place, and they say that it's especially flawed to rely on it now, 3 years later, because a lot of market conditions have changed. The need for the pipeline isn't, according to them, as clear as it might have been at the time. So those lawsuits are in district court in Montana. Those will move forward. We'll also see a lot of action on the ground in Nebraska, where state officials still have to consider whether to approve state permits for the pipeline. So you'll see a lot of activists working to influence that decision. We could very well see litigation in Nebraska once that decision is made.
All right. Thank you guys for joining me. I think there's a lot of news here that'll keep us busy for quite a long time.
Thanks, Monica.
And thank you for watching.